The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. And we're pleased to have Delegate Bobby Orrock with us this morning, representing the 54th District. I happen to be a constituent. Thank you for being here, sir.
My pleasure, Woody. Good to see you, as always.
You also chair the Health, Welfare, and Institutions Committee. I believe you're a member of Finance. You're a member of the Agriculture,
Chesapeake, and Natural
Resources, and also the Rules Committee, I believe. Give us an idea of the jurisdiction of the committee that you chair.
Well, the Health, Welfare, and Institutions, as the title implies, deals with a lot of health issues, so that gets into scope of practice for physicians and the other allied health professionals, licensure of certain individuals within that field, and the whole broad spectrum of health, whether it be immunization, things of that nature. The welfare component does get into the social service issues, child daycare, things of that nature. And the institutions, it addresses our mental facilities, but also, most people don't realize, Department of Corrections matters come under our purview as well. In most years, and this year being typical of that, 90% of the bills that we see will be focusing on the health field of our Commonwealth and its public policy. A little bit more in welfare, or a few in the welfare, and very few in the corrections end or the institutions.
And of course, agriculture is very important in the Commonwealth. I think it employs more people than any other industry in the state.
The agriculture industry is the single largest economic component of our Commonwealth. And that's everything from the farms you see driving down the road, forest, because of the committee's interest in Chesapeake and natural resources. We also get our waterman issues, things of that nature. So it is a very critical part of our state's economy. A lot of diverse issues. I've got some bills that are up in there, my own this year, in particular dealing with companion animal care, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about later, but that's kind of the general matters that we see. We also see issues relating game and inland fisheries. So game law changes that can't be handled through their normal regulatory process.
And of course you have Finance, which is the money-raising committee, so to speak, but you work hand in hand with appropriations, obviously.
Sometimes we're not so sure in Finance how hand in hand it goes. But yes, unlike in the Senate where their Finance Committee has to generate the revenues and they get to spend it, they've never trusted me with the checkbook, as it were, I tell people. We just have to address the finance end, but that does get into all of your tax increases or tax credits or tax exemptions. And so those are the matters we deal with on a regular basis. And there always seems to be a never-ending line of individuals who want their taxes done away with. The old phrase I've heard ever since I've been here, don't tax you, don't tax me, go tax the fellow behind the tree. Well, you can't do that, so.
And there's a lot of conversation around creating a new Virginia economy. How has your district fared over the last few years, especially in terms of sequestration?
Our area has obviously undergone some of the economic downturn, just like the rest of the state. It's fared better than many others, but as we know there in my district, being about half of Spotsylvania County and a little bit of Caroline, about 70 to 80% of our workforce works outside of the immediate area, and many of those are in government or government-related jobs. So sequestration has had an impact. In spite of the governor's very rosy comments during his State of the Commonwealth address, that's just not true statewide. It's just not that rosy in our general area. And so one of the main focuses of this General Assembly has been, we've got to recognize that the private sector economy, the private sector businesses are those that are going to be the long-term sustainable revenue generators for our citizens and the Commonwealth. And we've got to try and work to affect public policy to make Virginia, again, the #1 business-friendly state in the nation, because that's how our citizens are all going to benefit in the economy as a whole.
And I believe the Commonwealth, unfortunately, is 48th amongst the states in growth. And
Yeah.
I think 13 out of the 20 top employers in the state are in the public sector yet.
Yeah. And I mean, with sequestration and our proximity to Washington and our heavy military influence down at Hampton Roads, those have all been very stabilizing in past economic circumstances for the Commonwealth. But in the current economic climate in Washington, it's bringing our state economy down. And we know the federal government has to make additional cutbacks in their spending. The current level of spending at the federal level is totally unsustainable. We can't keep spending our grandkids' money. We've already spent our kids' money, and we've just got to put the brakes on up there. And so states like Virginia that have so much impact from federal employees and federal contracts, we've got to be ready to keep the state going forward and productive, and that's got to focus more on the private sector.
And of course, the private sector, I think, brought an idea to the General Assembly. It's being implemented sometime in the near future. It's called Go Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about that concept and what it means.
Well, and I don't have all the details on the Go Virginia, but it is just predominantly looking at where there are regulations that we can relax on the Commonwealth, where there are areas we can incentivize for greater investment, greater employee participation, hiring new individuals, making improvements in production, and just what are those things, with that focus being whatever we can do at the state level without jeopardizing the rest of our budget and the economy. What can we do to improve the business climate so that all Virginians will have greater opportunities, higher paying jobs, and more sustainable jobs for the future?
And how important is it to motivate regions to work together?
No question. We've got to start breaking down some of these geographical boundaries from county to county and encourage greater regional cooperation. There in our area, as an example, Spotsylvania in particular has a much more robust and diverse water and sewer infrastructure. Mm-hmm. If Caroline County, just to the south, that doesn't have that, if they could develop some cooperative arrangements where a business may locate in Caroline where the land costs are lower, but they don't have the infrastructure in place, that could be to everybody's benefit. And we are trying to facilitate that from the state level without developing authorities. We've been able to address that in the past through the creation of independent authorities, but local governments tend to not like that because then they start losing local control.
So instead of competing, for example, Carolina and Spotsylvania for certain things, it's much better for them to cooperate
Right.
on a regional basis to get things
Right,
done.
rather than look at just what one county has to bring to the table to offer to a company, what can 2 or 3 counties with their diverse student population through the high schools, the worker training, things of that nature, and then the very differences in land values, land cost, and infrastructure, bring that whole package together where everybody's got more to offer to a company and get them here to Virginia.
Now, you've been an educator for 30 plus years now, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes. Talk to us about some of the budget needs of the local school districts in your district.
The budget needs are always going to exceed our ability, I think, to address them because we have to keep it in the context of all the other demands placed on government. Teachers have always, I think, been the masters of efficiency, have always been able to do a whole lot with very few resources. The challenges that I've seen in particular change over the year, the student demands, the expectations from parents as far as media and technology, all which come at a pretty high price tag. Can we infuse them to the level to meet the diverse needs? I mean, we're seeing our whole society becoming totally technology dependent and focused. We in education have to embrace that because that's the reality, and that's not cheap. But then in so doing, we can't lose sight of the other practical skills, and particularly in the field that I teach, and all the other general career and technical skill areas that are part of my curriculum. How do we meld those two together? And they do have a high price tag, but we personally, I'm pretty innovative and just try and solicit public input to provide resources, lumber, metal, things of that nature, to help supplement the kind of small budget I'm given, but we do well with it, I think.
How important is it now to focus on the trades and certifications? Obviously, academics are critical, but how important is it now to focus on those kinds of certifications that can lead to good jobs for our students?
Well, I think it's always been critical. I mean, I got into the career and tech education field 39 years ago. Still in it. We'll see if this is the last year or not, but time will tell. But I think the problem in education is we've kind of gotten into an either-or type of education plan. And I've always felt, no, it should be a both. That I think every college graduate will benefit from having some practical application of those skills, hands-on activities that they've been involved with. And it gives them greater diversity in a changing job market and greater flexibility, greater marketability. I think that's become even more important in our changing work environment out there today. I've seen statistics, the average individual will change jobs 3 to 6 times during their normal work career. That wasn't the case 30 years ago. So we've got to have greater flexibility. Also, when you look at the fact, and this has been true for years, that the 50% of those college freshmen entering college will never get a 4-year degree.
50% of it.
50%, and that's pretty much nationwide. And that's not to put down our higher education system. It is rather to say that our higher education system is designed to take students who are willing to meet their standards, and they're going to take them to a high level, and then they've got a good marketable degree when they come out. But if they're not serious about it, they're probably not going to succeed. Those students, especially if their sole focus has been on just meeting college admission requirements, they don't have a degree, they don't have background skills, and they're going to be highly unmarketable in the workforce. And I think we've got to meld the two. When you look at average salaries, you've got your high-tech, high-pay salaries on the one end, and then you have your career and tech skilled workforce. They're making very good money and being able to provide very good livings for their family. So we've got to be more flexible in that and provide more of a well-rounded education, in my perspective.
Now, what about the impact at the K through 12 level of the standards of learning? That has been debated. There have been changes to the standards of learning over the last few years. What kind of impact has that had for you, parents, and students?
And boy, you've opened up a whole broad area there, Woody. That I think the implementation of the standards of learning when they initially went into effect was a wonderful thing for education, in that it brought everybody up. Every school division in the state was brought up to a common base education level. And we know factually they weren't all there. And there were parts of our Commonwealth where the education standards were incredibly low when students were getting diplomas, that when they took them into the workforce, oh, you're from this county, the diploma didn't mean much of anything. I think a diploma to an employee now means a lot more than it used to. I think initially we maybe pushed too hard in that standardization, where it was just being based on pretty much your answers to multiple choice questions, which isn't the best means of evaluating a student. And so we are now looking at modifying those. We've done away with some of those standards of learning. I think they are becoming more true curriculum driven. Always heard the argument, well, you're just teaching to the test.
Right.
And I understand that, but I got to say, as a teacher, if my test isn't reflective of what I'm teaching, then the test doesn't matter anyway. And so the standards of learning tests were based on the state-approved curriculum, so it is what every teacher was supposed to be teaching. So yeah, from that perspective, I guess you are teaching to the test, but it's not a bad thing if the curriculum is what's driving the test. But we have looked at that we've needed to change the curriculum in many of the areas, so the standards of learning tests will need to change accordingly. And we've got to provide greater teacher flexibility in how they measure the students achieving those objectives, because just a written test isn't the best means of evaluating the student's progress. In my area of instruction in particular, where about half my class is based on practical skills, I can tell you whether a kid knows their measurement skills, knows their math skills, by their ability to complete a specific woodworking project, as an example, and shouldn't that count?
Is a local school district penalized if I, as a parent, decide, for example, that my child should not be subjected to the trauma of the standards of learning?
Well, I don't know of a way that a parent can get out of that. I don't know of any opt-out provision, unless you just want to homeschool, and then there's a separate curriculum standard that your students would have to master at that level. So a diploma's got to mean that every student has had measurable outcomes, and good, bad, or otherwise, there's got to be a test in there somewhere to prove that they mastered the knowledge required.
How predictive of success or failure is the ability of a child to read at the 3rd grade level?
You're getting a little bit out of my area of expertise because I'm just up at the high school level, but we do know that reading is critical no matter what your future objectives are. That's one of the things in career and tech field that some of my students don't have the best reading skills and question why do they need them. And when I show them that the career and tech field, because of technical changes within that entire industry, every segment of it is one of the most reading intensive areas that they'll ever go into in life, that helps them to realize how important it is. We have to do some catch up, but you're exactly right. Reading at an early age is critical throughout the whole instructional program, no matter what the course is.
Now, what about charter schools? We don't have very many charter schools compared to other states or even the District of Columbia. Some people argue they provide choice and they provide competition for our public schools. And I believe there's a bill that would give the State Board of Education now the authority to determine whether a charter school would be created versus a local school district.
Yeah, the current law will allow a local school division to approve a charter school that has made application at that level, and it predominantly allows that school to not have to comply with all of the same building standards, student-teacher ratios, some of the other state requirements, but still adhere to the educational standards on evaluation for those students. So they're going to be learning the same or greater information, just in a little bit different setting is the premise. We've only got 9 operating in the Commonwealth now, and there have anecdotally been a number of other applications tendered, and local school divisions haven't approved those. Now, why they haven't, I don't know the specifics. They're in Spotsylvania from talking with the board. They have never had an application come forward that met all the criteria that the Department of Education sets. If they've had one come forward, then it was sent back for modification, and nobody's ever come up to the bar that the state has set. Now, what the proposed constitutional amendment and legislation, if the amendment passes, would do is create a mechanism whereby if a local school division says no, then that charter school entity could come to the State Department of Education. It would still have to go back and somewhat be administered by the local school division. It would still be a public charter school. So it in no way, shape, or form creates a mechanism where we've got public school monies going to support a private school directly.
Now, we talked a little bit earlier about a statistic that 50% of the high school graduates who decide to attend an institution of higher learning will not graduate. How important are community colleges then? Because that's another place where you can get a certificate, for example, that can lead you to a good employment opportunity.
And Woody, I'm so glad you brought that up, because they are very critical to all of our students for higher education and career training, but in particular for those who maybe aren't going to get that 4-year degree, because frequently those college freshmen find out that first year at Virginia Tech, and I'm a case in point. I started out at Virginia Tech, and I do remember orientation back in the day, and we're sitting there and they said, look to your left and look to your right. This time next year, one of you won't be here. That there's about a 33% attrition in that first year. And I was one of those. And my sophomore year, I wasn't at Virginia Tech, but I was at Germanna. And I went to the community college there. I got my academic basics, and I was able to go back to Virginia Tech as a junior, because I hadn't done so poorly in that freshman year to not be able to get back. And I finished up on time. So one, it was critical for me to get back, and two, it's also critical for those students who just find that the college, the 4-year college realm is not what's going to meet their needs. It provides a wonderful place to get an associate degree, other career trades, things of that nature, and make them very marketable out there in a career.
And it also provides an opportunity for those adults who have unfortunately lost their jobs during the recession. They can go to school there and pick up
retraining.
Exactly. It's also important for our veterans, is it not? Because
very much
we have
so.
a number of veterans returning from theaters of war who have great experiences. They've been exposed to a lot of new
Right.
innovative technology. Talk to us about the importance of that.
Well, they've got the life skills. They've gotten the training through a military training program and exposure, and now we need to find a means whereby they can get the certifications, as it were, that our industry will require. And the community college realm is an excellent place for that with the diversity of offerings they have around the Commonwealth. We've got just outside of Richmond major mechanic training components. We've got vet tech programs and other community colleges, all of which tend to try and focus on the job needs of those particular regions. But a student can go to those various schools and sometimes through satellite programs with other community colleges not even have to go there and still get the training. So that's going to be critical for our future.
And I guess an example of the ability to use that experience towards credit at a junior college is, and I know you have been a volunteer EMT for years, someone who was in the medic corps,
Right.
for example, in Iraq, can come back and get credit for that experience now.
Correct, and we've actually got legislation pending this session that's working its way through to allow for collaborative agreements with physicians. In particular, looking at a pilot in the Tidewater area where specifically military medical personnel who didn't have the state certifications can still go to a hospital, collaborate with a physician, and be able to streamline and short-circuit the process to where they'll get their necessary certifications and utilize the skills that we all can benefit from.
Great. Now let's turn our attention to some specific pieces of legislation that you are pursuing this session. Animal welfare is an important one. Talk to us about that.
Well, I was counseled early on, don't get into bills that deal with dogs and cats, but it seems every year I do. Last year we had legislation that went through that unfortunately folks felt made a bigger change as it relates to what private animal shelters could or could not do than it really did. We made a change in the definition of a private animal shelter that truly just took what the first half of the definition said and the second half of the definition said and flipped them. But you still had an and in the middle, so before and after, they still had to do the same things and still could do the same things. Created a lot of confusion within the private animal shelter world. I had folks from the Alliance, the State Alliance of Animal Shelters, come to me and say, Delegate Orrock, we need to try and address some of the confusion. So I put in legislation that at this point hopefully will work to Department of Agriculture coming up with regulations as to what a private animal shelter can and cannot do. The process whereby if they're going to euthanize animals, they would have to go through, there would be a reporting, there would be an accountability, recognizing two factors. One, we want to adopt as many as we possibly can adopt of our companion animals, but also at the end of the day, there are a large number of companion animals, feral or for other reasons, that are just not going to be adoptable, and we have to find a humane way to to remove those animals. They can't just be on the tax rolls, as it were, forever. So we've got to strike that balance between those two realities. That's generated a whole lot of emails from me and all my peers, predominantly based on misinformation about what I'm trying to achieve. But hopefully at the end of the day, we're going to protect our companion animals even better than we're doing now and strike that reasonable balance between the two. So that's been a lot of fun, always is. It's also kind of related to that, I've got a bill that will create an animal care advisory committee within the state veterinarian's office so that the folks on this issue, those stakeholders, can get together and try and resolve a lot of these complex matters before it gets down here to the legislative process.
And what about improving efficiency in government?
There are a number of state agencies, Department of Education, the Social Services, have come to me, requesting me to carry legislation that will make their jobs a little more efficient. Our code has all kinds of reporting requirements on state agencies, as it should, because we've got to keep them accountable to the policymakers. But it's come to my attention in education and social services in particular, there are a number of duplicative reports. And to try and remove those, there are some that just don't make sense anymore to have to report every year. We can do those every other year. And the more bureaucracy and overhead administrative cost we can remove from government, the more efficient it becomes, the better we're utilizing the taxpayers' monies for things that they can truly benefit from.
And I know you've been involved in a lot of healthcare issues, especially access to healthcare. Talk to us about those initiatives.
This year in particular, I'm proud to be carrying a piece of legislation that will make mobile health clinics more available to our nursing home communities, to our underserved areas of the Commonwealth, because we know that dental health has a major impact on overall health of an individual. So the more we can do to provide dental services, because that's kind of one of those things, if the money's tight, we tend to put that one last in line. And part of it's an accessibility issue. So we're trying to get trained dental professionals out to where people need them at a lower cost so that all the Commonwealth citizens will benefit from that.
Now, there's a bill that passed the House recently that's pending in the Senate. It purports to alter the relationship between county and local government and developers in terms of what are known as proffers. Tell us about that debate and the pros and cons of it.
Proffers, if you are from the local government perspective, they say are voluntary concessions that they asked to come from a developer before they will approve the project. From the developer community, they will say they're not voluntary. They become hostage, as it were, to the proffer process, and that if they don't meet what the county asked for, the project's not coming. I voted against the measure because I think it has gone too far in taking away the local government's ability to, Woody, let's say that you want to come and put in a development that requires a rezoning. If I'm the county government and looking out for all the citizens of that county short and long term, I have to make sure that your development isn't going to be a burden on the rest of the community. And so that's where the proffers come in. One of the problems I see with the current proffer system is the timing of when they come to bear. That we have a development approved now, and it may have proffers for certain road improvements, but it may take 5 to 8 years just through the normal road building, land acquisition process before we'll actually see those roads in place. And of course, we needed them the first year that the development was open and people were there. That's one of the disconnects, and I think this may go actually in the opposite direction to try and resolve that piece of the complex problem.
You mentioned roads, and we've got about a minute left, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to discuss the transportation needs that you see in your district. We've got a new VRE station, rail station, that opened up in Spotsylvania County recently. I think that's going to help there. But what are some of the transportation needs that you see?
Well, at the end of the day, Woody, we've got to focus more of our transportation on transporting people versus cars. We will never be able to build as many roads as it will take if everybody's driving their own car. And Americans are in love with their car, myself included. But if you look at other world economies, other societies around the world, they're more focused on transporting people because we eat up just so much valuable land that could be used for other purposes when we pave over it, and we just build in gridlock with that philosophy.
Great. Well, thank you for being with us, Delegate Bobby Orrock. Good to see you.
Thank you, Woody. Good to be here.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.